I've got a cool pattern for you today, and it's cool for a couple of reasons. First, it's really easy to tie. No exotic materials and no advanced techniques. And it's kind of a multi-purpose fly. I mean, it really is a caddis, but in smaller sizes, it works great as a mayfly. And it's a pretty versatile pattern. You can change the color of the hackle, you can change the color or the material of the body. And the wing, you can use almost any hair except for deer or elk. You want something that's coarse but not hollow so it doesn't flare up. You kind of want this thing to lay flat. Now I'm going to use woodchuck today, but I do tie these with squirrel tail, mink, fox, even possum fur for the wing. And depending on what fur you use, you might have to pull the under fur out so that you can get it to stack, as you'll see in what I'm about to do using woodchuck. So, what pattern is this? Well, Eric Leiser was probably the first one to tie it, and he called it his Woodchuck Caddis because he did use woodchuck for the wing. But is it a Woodchuck Caddis if you use squirrel tail or mink? I don't know. Call it whatever you want to call it. All I know is this thing is a great fly. And I do tie these pretty small, usually in 16s or 18s, so quite a bit smaller than my standard elk hair caddis. And I'll use 3 primary colors, a tan and a dun, which matches most of the caddis flies here on the Savage River, but also in an olive, which is what I was fishing with this past weekend on the Gunpowder. So stick around after the tie for a couple minutes if you want to see me fishing this thing. Now, I didn't catch anything bigger than the standard 9-inch Gunpowder Wild Brown, but you do get a glimpse of a pretty cool river. So there it is, my generic multi-purpose caddis, which, I don't really call a woodchuck caddis because I make that wing out of all kinds of materials, all kinds of non-hollow fur. And I will tie this in 16s and 18s. That's about it. Now you could certainly go bigger if the bugs in your water are bigger, but this is what has worked for me. And I'm going to use some black thread. I'll lay a base down to the start of the bend. Now let's put some wax and get our dubbing on here. Now it's a dry fly, so I'm going to recommend a synthetic. And this is a superfine. A superfine or microfine would be just great. Doesn't take much. We're going to dub the back 2/3 of it, and not real thick. I mean, if you want to try and get a taper, that's fine, go for it. I don't think it's all that vital. This is really, oops, I hung up on my hook point there. This is really just going to give it some color. Okay, I think that's fine. Now again, for the wing, you can really use anything you want, any kind of fur or hair that's not hollow. So this is a woodchuck, and that's what I'm going to tie it with right here. So this patch, pretty well worn, but it's got plenty of good stuff left. But if you do use something like woodchuck, take a look at this. That's really, that might be a little bit more than we want even, but look at this I pulled out. There's a ton of under fur and everything in there. So really just pull this out and get it as thin as you want, and then put it in your stacker. And if you get all that under fur out, it should stack pretty well. Let's see. Okay, that's going to be fine right there. Now I've got my thread hanging where I want to catch this in. You see I'm a little bit over that dubbing, and that's fine. That will help this thing lay flat. I'm going to give it a clockwise spin and just cord my thread up so I'll get a good bite on this wing right here. Now just measure the length, maybe a little bit past the bend of the hook. Kind of up to you how you want to do this. But my thread is well corded up, so I should get a pretty good bite right there. I can bind it down pretty tight, and I still shouldn't have that flare up too much. So I think we're going to be just fine right there. Now one thing you can always do, if it starts spinning around the hook on you, you can lift this up and put a wrap up under it. In this case we don't need to. Let's go ahead and trim the front. Now I'm going to spend a few thread wraps here, just trying to smooth this area out for wrapping the hackle. Okay, hopefully that's going to be smooth enough. Now for the hackle, you can try to match the body color if you want, or just use a Grizzly. Grizzly is going to work for pretty much everything. Certainly on a fly this small, it will be just fine. But I do some of them, the tan ones I tie, I might use a ginger, a lighter colored hackle feather, but the Grizzly is always going to be fine. And we're not putting too many wraps. 3 is probably going to be enough. We'll see. You know, depending on the quality of your hackle, 3, you might want to take 4, but we'll see what 3 does for us with this one. Okay, I think that is going to be plenty, and I'm already crowding my eye a little bit. I should have started that hackle a little bit farther back, but you know what? As long as we get our tippet through the eye, we're going to be fine. So I think we're okay right there. 2 wraps to lock that. Now pull this back, maybe a couple of wraps just to try to bind this in. I've got 1 fiber right there going forward that I'm going to have to trim or singe off, but yeah, we'll be okay. Let's go ahead and whip finish this and then trim that excess feather there. So that's it. Really a pretty simple flat wing multi-purpose caddis dry fly. So stick around a couple minutes if you want to see me fishing this thing last weekend. All right, good morning. I'm on a Gunpowder River just downstream of Macemore Road. I haven't seen any bugs in the area, so the tactic I'm going to start with this morning is just a generic dry fly. The one I'm using is kind of a mix between just a mayfly and a caddis fly. It's got a hackle, sort of like a mayfly, but then a trued wing, kind of like a caddis. And I'll tie this thing in a tan, an olive, and a dun color, usually pretty small. Got a size 18 on in an olive this morning. I did see a fish rising just back there in that submerged, right behind that submerged log, if you can see that back there. I'm not sure if you can, but yeah, I'm going lightweight. Got my 2-weight today, long light leader, and pretty small bugs. So let's see if we can't get this guy to come up for this thing. There's one. Came up for it just to the right of that submerged log there. Not a huge guy, pretty typical gunpowder brown. Let's take a look at this guy. We'll put him in the net. Come on, buddy. No, no, no. There we go. Get the hook out of him, wet my hand. There we go. Typical 9-incher or so. Nice little fish though. Get on back in there, buddy.